All right, everyone. My name's Anthony Costello, and this is the Equal Justice Podcast. The Equal Justice Podcast is a forum for all those who seek truth, value tradition, and fight to defend the foundations of a moral and just society. I'm joined again with Jacob Daniel.
Hi.
Logan Zeppieri, and Josh Matayka. All the way from the land of the free, right, Josh? Where are we now? Arizona, Texas?
Florida now.
Oh,
all over the
place. America. You're in America.
Yeah, I'm on the southern tip.
What's it like living in the land of the free, in the home of the brave out there?
It's fantastic. I can actually move places and do things with my life. So
we got indoor dining now in California, so I mean we're getting back.
Oh, there you go.
Which is the standard by which we gauge everything here, is whether or not you can eat in a restaurant or not.
Whenever I think of Florida, I think of alligator meat, which I've never had. So I just want to try that.
It's really good, man. You got to. It's actually really good.
Well, it's good that we start out with a little bit of humor because we do have a serious topic tonight, unfortunately. And there has been a recent mass shooting. I guess we would call this a mass shooting in Atlanta that we're going to address, which happened to include the killing of the murder of 6 Asian Americans, 6 Asian American women. So we won't go into the details of the shooting itself or anything about gun control, those kinds of issues. But there has been a response to the shooting, of course, in the Christian community, especially in the evangelical community as well, that we're going to take a look at because we do want to try and answer a very serious question of, do Asian lives matter, or do all Asian lives matter? And we're going to try and take a look at this through the lens of some critical race theorists and how they might feel about this issue, as opposed to maybe what we're calling a fundamental equal justice view. So Jacob, start us off with, we know what happened in Atlanta. There was a shooter. He was a white, obviously heterosexual male, young man. And again, 6 of the 8 women were Asian Americans. These all took place at massage parlors. And there has been a response from Asian American Christians, as well as other sort of, I guess what we'd call racial minorities, about the problem of violence in the Asian community. So give us some initial thoughts on the problem.
Yeah, it's definitely unfortunate as to what has happened. But even more unfortunate is that how we jump into making conclusions as to what might have caused that. And the question in front of us is that, are we coming to those conclusions on the basis of facts or on the basis of emotions? And I can definitely see a lot of emotional conclusions being made on this particular matter. But in the midst of all that, I do see, even among minorities, for example, this Chinese American Citizens Alliance in New York, they came up with this statement where they very succinctly laid out in terms of the effects of the way we are understanding racial issues today through the light of critical race theory and the impact that is happening in distinguishing between minorities and not providing them with the same framework within which they would be understood in terms of how they're being oppressed or how they've been affected by racism or whatever it may be. So what I want to say is that, so this group, basically, it's called the Chinese American Citizens Alliance Greater in New York, basically condemns critical race theory. And it is coming from a minority group because in light of some of the tension that's been seen in terms of not just between whites and Asians, but also tension in between other minorities and Asians. And that's a discussion to have. And I believe we'll touch on that even during this discussion time that we have. But my question is that why is it that in the midst of all this that we are seeing, that we are disregarding certain facts? Not just facts between the crime between the whites and the Asians, but also the crime between blacks and Asians, or Asians and blacks, or why is it that it is going just one-sided? And that's a discussion to have. And it's an important one. Yeah.
Right. And we'll pull up this report from the criminal, what was it? It's the Justice Department.
National Crime Victimization Survey. Is that what you're
We'll
referring
pull up
to?
the 37-page report here in a minute, which shows some of the breakdown of, which racial groups are committing violence against other racial groups, or in this case, Asian American racial groups. But on that point, though, of sort of facts, figures, and statistics, Logan, and then Josh after, because you brought that report to my attention. But Logan, there was not an article, but in Christianity Today and their blog, is called the Samaritan's Post, I think is called the blog.
The Better Samaritan.
The Better Samaritan. There was a series of statements made by some leaders in the church, pastors in the evangelical church, two of which we are already familiar with, Raymond Chang and Jeff Liu, who are members of the CCCU. They were part of the panel discussion that we critiqued in our last episode. That basically attributed the shooting in Atlanta to white supremacy and whiteness, and sort of the whole narrative that critical race theory wants to continue to propagate, that these violent acts are now manifestation of whiteness or white supremacy being carried out upon here, not just Black Americans or African Americans, but now Asian Americans. So, I mean, what are your thoughts on that in light of some of the facts and figures that you've seen?
Yeah. So this kind of goes in line with kind of the controlling question that we have for this podcast episode, and that is, do all Asian lives matter? And this goes down, if you could just for a moment, strip away CRT, if you strip away this kind of fundamental equal justice views and ask, what is it? I think there's an intuition among society that we ask, like, okay, do we think that crimes committed against Asians are wrong? I think we all say yes. If whites commit crimes against Asians, wrong? Yes. If Blacks commit crimes against Asians, is that wrong? Yes. If Asians commit crimes against Asians, is it wrong? Yes. If Asians commit crimes against Blacks or whites or Native Americans, all that's wrong. Yes. All of that's wrong. But the question then emerges is this question of theory sensitivity. And that is, what does the theory pick up as wrong? Under the CRT view, what they are sensitive to is one, race, and two, a one-way directional dynamic between the oppressed and the oppressor, or the oppressor to the oppressed, sorry. And so back in February, there was some news had covered it. It was a series of attacks on the Asian community by predominantly Black Americans. And that didn't really get a lot of widespread coverage. And I didn't want to make it on Facebook, whatever, post, oh, look at this. Let's stand back and see what happens. Then you have a shooting by a white individual against the Asian community. Boom, there it is. It fit the CRT narrative that a white individual had attacked the Asian community. That's atrocious. It's still atrocious. The question, though, and it's not a whataboutism. We're in a popular social media age where if you say, let's expand what that theory encompasses, they say it's a whataboutism. Mm-hmm. But I think it's deeper than that. It's that CRT can't understand or can't interpret within the structure of its own theory an oppressed on oppressed crime. And so I think that's a rub, is that I don't think under strictly CRT you could say that Asians attacked by maybe Blacks, those lives don't matter for outrage. I think CRT would be forced into that conclusion that most, I think, Americans wouldn't agree with. Now, if you say that people are fundamentally equal, then it makes sense. It's bad in both cases. In all those cases, it's bad because why? They're fundamentally equal. It's not because they're part of some designated class. And this goes to that article that Jacob commented on about New York. Mm-hmm. And their chief complaint is it seems that the more successful the Asian community becomes, the less relevant they become when they are attacked. Say, for example, with the Ivy League schools discriminating against them on the SAT scores. Well, it didn't seem as relevant because they were successful. And so you get to see the theory kind of operating. It's becoming, well, the more successful, the less relevant. Oppress on oppress seems less relevant. So the question comes is, can you account for the value of all Asian lives under CRT or under something like fundamental equal justice?
It's a good point. Well, Josh, you were the one who sent or first made me aware of the report that we just referenced, which I'll pull up here for a second on my share screen. And I think I still have it right on the sort of relevant table. Can you guys see that?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, Josh, go ahead and give us your take on what you noticed here as you were skimming through this report.
Yeah, so I actually found this report through a secondary source, which gave a really great breakdown of the numbers. I mean, there's so many ways that you can create pie charts off of this to figure different things, especially once you factor in, different population sizes for whites, blacks, Hispanics, and Asians. I think, let's see what it is. For Asians, it's roughly 6.2% of the population. That's what they represent. I'm sorry, 6.3 according to this study, the NCVS, or actually, I think it's a census. For Hispanics, it's 17%. For blacks, it's 12%, and then whites make up 62.3% of the population, with other, either racially ambiguous or Native American or just smaller representation at basically 2.4%. And so, when you factor in the population differences and then you look at the total number of violent incidents, you can basically see the likelihood of racial attacks of different races. And so if you can directly analyze, right, the claim that white people are, for example, and this is just one claim, that white people are attacking Asians at these unprecedented rates, or that there's this specific white on Asian violence due to white supremacy. Now there might be nuances in that claim. We're just going to take that claim generally and let's break it down, right? So, for example, we look at the total number of violent incidents against whites. We have 3,581,360. Actually, I have my calculator out, and we can specifically look at just the interactions between white victims and Asian perpetrators. So you multiply that by 2.2%, so 0.022, and you get 78,789 or 790 incidents between whites and Asians, where Asians are the perpetrators and whites are the victims. And then on the other side, where you have interactions between Asians and whites, where Asians are the victims and whites are the perpetrators, you arrive at that number through calculating 182,230 and multiplying that by 0.241% there again on the table. And that gives you the total number of incidents where you have a violent interracial crime where the white person is a perpetrator and the Asian is a victim. And you get 43,917. When you take those two numbers, you can see pretty easily that the first one, basically there's 1.8 times as many incidents where the Asian individual is the perpetrator and the white person is the victim than vice versa, even though Asians only make up 1/10 of the population of white persons. And so when you factor in population statistics, it's actually 18 times as likely that an Asian person will attack a white person as vice versa. And so, and actually you can do that across the board and play with different numbers with the victim, whether the victim's black or white and Hispanic. And I just want to say, like, the point of stating this isn't to say, oh, you to point fingers at any individual race. In fact, that's the exact opposite of what we're trying to do. The point in showing that is to say that the basis for the claims being made right now that are pointing fingers and blaming and white people and really the majority who's considered privileged, whether in this case it's white, sometimes it's just cisgender, or it's male, or whatever the category is. In terms of race, it's white. That it's just not on the basis of facts, like Jacob was saying. It's not. And this information is publicly available. And you can get all sorts of retorts like, well, certain things are underreported, this and that. But at the end of the day, this is the best evidence. This is the most accurate evidence we have. And it points to a completely different story than what is being portrayed by the media. And so and again, going to Logan's point, the reason for that is simply that CRT has no other way to make sense of oppressed versus oppressed crimes, or even oppressed versus oppressor crimes, where the oppressor is or perceived oppressor is considered the victim. They don't know. CRT doesn't know what to do with that, and so it's a lot easier to simply ignore the evidence to continue to fit a narrative that's just simply untrue.
So, boy, that's a good breakdown, Josh. I'm going to stop the share screen on that, but we will certainly link to that report so people can pick it up, pull it up, and read it for themselves. Jacob, it's hard. I want to say that this is a difficult podcast to do, because it's one thing to say, we kind of expect that from the world. The world, Aristotle said man is a political beast. We would expect that people would use and misuse and abuse information for the sake of some political agenda that they want to push, leaving out relevant details and so on and so forth. Is this happening amongst our church leaders now as well? I certainly don't want to make any pinpoint allegations or accusations. We do want to try and refrain from that. But it does seem like if those statistics are correct, which I think Josh pointed out, that's probably the best empirical data you have right there on racialized crime, violent crime. I mean, what about these Christian leaders who seem to be, are just unaware of this, or are they ignorant of it and they don't want to mention it? If they are aware of it and they don't want to mention it, boy, that seems pretty close to me. Leaving out important information is very close to just basically lying in my view. It is lying.
Well, this is what I think though is so profound about the shift. When you read through, for example, the Christianity Today article, you don't have people citing facts or figures or asking the question, what is the state of violence going on in America? What it is narrative driven. Now, it's not, I think where people make the mistake is they automatically assume that narrative driven is just inherently wrong. I don't think that's the argument. The argument, though, is if you're going to use narrative driven arguments, the question you should ask is, how are the narratives being selected, and what are the narratives selecting? And it seems like it's saying they're selecting specifically one kind of crime and they're ignoring all the others. And I think that's the response that should be brought up, is that these pastors are just adopting the narrative, but they're not asking, well, who's doing the narrative selecting, or why are they doing the narrative selecting, or what are we missing out by selecting a narrative that doesn't incorporate the other violence as well?
I completely agree with you, Logan, on that. And I think what's happening, especially within the church, is that church leaders are under a lot of pressure because we have to agree that they have congregants who would listen to them maybe for 3 hours in a week, maximum, right? That's what happens. But rest of the days of the week, they're listening to the media, they're listening to narratives, as you mentioned, right? And their emotions are touched. So it's not much engagement in terms of the facts or statistics, which is now in our culture seen as being against the notion of our public interaction as to how it informs our public interaction. So I think leaders in the church have, not all, I wouldn't generalize this, there are faithful Christian leaders who are really standing up and fighting, trying to understand, taking time, and really engaging with their congregants to understand where they are in terms of these events that are unfortunate, but there are many within the church who are capitulating all because of the price that it involves. And I don't think we have counted the cost in terms of what it would entail if we stand against this cultural direction that the culture is taking. There is definitely a price to pay. And I see a lot of people, and let me share this in the academic field itself. There is a push for CRT and taking hold of these incidents and also narratives of individuals and accommodating them into their framework of CRT is also because it pays well, it rewards well. It rewards in many ways, especially in the academic world. You get better positions. You can get, in even tenure, you can, because that's where the culture is heading. And a lot of people are giving into it. I think, personally, I feel, I was sharing with you, right? I've had a couple of offers being given for teaching positions. And I know the motivation was not merely because of my academic achievements or my knowledge or anything, but also only because of where I come from, the cultural background, and I didn't take those positions. I didn't want that to be the motivation for me to step into an academic.
You discerned that they were intentionally taking into account your Indian
heritage and
you're probably even just the look of your skin, and you rejected that.
I had to. I didn't want that to be the motivation.
Right.
So I'm not saying that doesn't speak into who I am. It doesn't speak into how I teach and things like that. Not at all saying, but that should not be the primary motivation in terms of rewarding me for my ethnicity or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't be unlike somebody in 1962 Missouri who was applying for a job as a white guy, and maybe there was, maybe that's not a good example, because in 1962 Missouri, maybe not many Black or Hispanic people were applying for the same positions as white men, but you could see somebody not wanting to just get something handed to them because they were white, right?
And the reason why I shared that is also because if you see with the Asian community, and we were talking about the whole the competition that they were into in terms of getting into Ivy League colleges, that was not on the basis of their ethnicity or background. It was on the basis of their achievement in terms of pursuing being minority, even, right? Being in the same context, they're working hard and trying to achieve being in those places where they could actually perform with God-given capacity. So when that was not the motivation, but given the current cultural mood and the way we have accommodated into CRT framework, now that is becoming, right? We are moving away from the merit-based framework to more of a race-based framework in terms of giving people opportunities and accommodating them into positions and place of influence on the basis of other factors, but not on the basis of their performance or other things. And that's not the way we can actually build a flourishing society. That won't happen. That's not the way we can actually promote essential equal dignity of all individuals.
I did have a question. I just direct this point, Jacob, just because your reference to being offered certain positions and not agreeing with the presumed reason for offering those positions. Do you think that say if you just imagine a situation in which you or maybe anyone else that's in your position when they're offered that, sometimes people say just play the game, accept the conditions, and then maybe you can resist later. Do you think accepting the conditions of employment or the conditions of a maybe just a position, maybe it's not being employed, do you think that somehow straps you down to not be able to speak into issues like fundamental equal human value because you've accepted your position based upon a racial criteria?
It works both ways, right? I see a lot of people who have signed, especially in the Christian institution, they have signed statement of faith, but they don't believe in it. Not everything in the statement of faith. Mm-hmm. They get into their position and they push the other side. That's happening too. And I think that's not should not be the motivation, because I completely believe in this, especially at an institutional level. If their motivation was to just bring you in on the basis of any other factors other than your capacity to teach and your knowledge and understanding and other factors, but only on the basis of your race and your color of your skin, there is no way, I believe, you can come out of the conditions they would put on you in terms of what you can promote. So basically, they will be controlling as to what you can say, what you can promote. And because there is an ideology, there is something behind much larger than you that is driving this institution.
To select you. Yeah.
To select you, definitely. So it's not just that as a lone person, and when you get in and you want to change things, you'll be doing it through the way of deception. And I don't think as a Christian I'm called to do that, right? And that's something I need to be very careful about. As a Christian, I'm supposed to be faithful in everything that I do, including if I'm getting into a teaching position. That has to be done not through the way of deception, but through the way of faithfulness to the truth of the gospel.
Well, let me.
But yeah, but I completely agree. It can be seen as a strategy that you get in and then you bring about changes, but the whole institution is much larger than who you are. Because I know of people who are finding it terribly difficult to make a stand in different departments that that I'm aware of. They want to speak the truth, but they can't speak the truth because they would then lose the job that they have, or some other, some price to pay because of their stance.
I want to pick up on that idea of deception, on whether or not we could really use deception to get even if we think we have some greater goal in mind. I mean, to me, this is the old sin of, trying
us on or something,
trying to do evil so that good may come, which Paul warns us about in Romans chapter 3.
Exactly.
With regards to, because Jacob, you brought up a point earlier about, sort of opportunism, right? When we were in Afghanistan targeting enemy combatants, one of the questions that we was always trying to figure out whenever we caught somebody is, what their more inherent motivation for the attack was, right? I mean, did you have a true believer in your hand, somebody who really believed in the global jihad as a religious duty, and was going to lay down his life, for the sake of that, transcendent mission, if you want to put it that way, and nothing really was going to change his mind, apart from maybe a revelation of Jesus? Or, did you catch somebody who, was maybe, 16-year-old kid who needed to bring some money home to his parents, and the true believer kind of came alongside, offered him, some dinari, and said, hey, just take this AK-47 and fire it over there at the Americans. So he does. So for two very different motivations, one is a true belief, the other is an opportunity to do something that, because you need money, because you need something more tangible, right? And I almost feel like if it's the Christian embracing critical race theory because they're a true believer, that maybe they're kind of deceived. I think they are deceived. I'll just be honest, to some degree at least. But for the person who is using CRT or kind of jockeying themselves as an advocate of CRT, and I think these people are out there. I mean, just because we're human, because maybe there's a faculty position waiting for them if they do get on board with the program, or a book deal, or a pastoring position, whatever. Now I feel like they're the deceiver, right? They're the one who's like, CRT, I could take it or leave it, but I got to get on board with it because I have this other more personal goal. And I do worry that, and look, I don't know that you can really know who those people might be unless you just actually know them personally. Yeah. But I tell you, we got to be careful to be discerning in these times. You just pointed that out with your own example of like, I'm not going to take a job that I might want if it's offered to me in the wrong way. And those are the kinds of principled stands we need to see.
Because truth is at the center, right?
Yeah,
we are aiming for objective truth. It's not based on my subjective feelings or some subjective attributes of my life that would define what truth will look like. And that's not the case. And one of the things, I know we're kind of like little digressing from the topic, but I just want to touch on this so that our listeners would know. This is why it matters as to what methodology, research methodology, for example, a department adopts for its students to come and do their research work. Now, what happens is that majority of people who get into teaching positions would get into it after doing their PhD. They go and do a PhD in different departments, and certain methodology is adopted or pushed in those departments. You can't do any other, right? Especially in the quantitative research methodology, the whole constructivism, for example, where you are not allowed to actually make objective claims. You have to make claims that you think are true, not necessarily that others would think that way. When they have spent 5-6 years doing their research work using a methodology that basically pushes the whole idea of constructivism and things like that, and then you take a job position, how is it that you can actually go against the whole framework on which you had built your own research work, right? There is no way you can actually go against it. Even your department would expect that you actually promote that ideology because they brought you in with that intention that you will actually push that ideology even within there, right? So there is that tension as well. It would take a brave person, someone who has might have done some research work within that framework, would come out and just fight against it.
Well,
because that person understands it better.
Yeah, and you just named it on the head, Jacob. That's what we need right now. We need the church to be brave. We need the Christians who see this deception for what it is to be willing to stand up for the truth. And in a time where it's becoming increasingly evil, just in general in society, and that society is becoming increasingly divided and at war. We need Christians who are willing to be persecuted for their faith. Of course, it's funny because it's like, you know, thinking from the perspective of each individual person. Of course, we want to look out for our families and our job status. That's natural, and security, right? That's just a basic psychological human need. We need those things, but also as Christians, I think the desire to want to serve Jesus Christ and to put the truth of not just the gospel, but everything that extends from that, right? Like everything like that's our core theology, right? Is the cross. But our political views are the way we live on a daily basis, the way we interact with our neighbor, the conversations we have in the grocery store, all that in the Christian life is an extension of that core belief. And so what we need to do is like you just said, we need people who are brave, who are willing to stand up for the truth in these different departments, in Hollywood, in whatever the context is that they're called to, whatever vocation they are in. We need people to stand up and say, it's not right to blame a whole race of people or a certain person based off a category of their skin or their it's just so ironic because it's even as I'm saying, I'm like, that's the very claim that CRT people are making, and yet they're doing that against people that they consider privileged or the oppressor. They're essentially attacking and inverting a value system where they can then attack them. And so we need people to stand up and say, even if that's true, even if all the claims you're making are true about, white people being in certain positions of power, or men having power over women, or cisgender normativity, or whatever it is, even if those claims are true, which I don't believe are, but even if they are, what is the right response to that? How do we address these issues, and how do we go about reconciliation so that we can have unity and love? And you can't have love without truth.
Mhm.
You can't divorce truth from love.
Or justice.
Or justice. Yeah.
So Logan, what I don't know, what have you seen some positive? Now, okay, we started this off with the shooting in Atlanta, and that unfortunately being used as yet another opportunity for critical race theory to be pushed to include in the church or in some parts of the church.
Yeah,
by
I
some
mean that
particular
Christianity
people.
Today articles
Yeah,
puts the church in the crosshair, center crosshair.
yeah. So I mean, let's just say that you can, I've already mentioned two names, but in that Christianity Today blog post, you can read the names of people who are saying this is a critical race theory issue. Where have you seen pushback on that, though? Maybe something a little bit more courageous that is saying, no, it's not necessarily a critical race theory issue.
Mm-hmm.
It's something where we can see this through a different lens and a better lens, better maybe explanatory lens, and
Yeah.
something that will also maybe lead to actual solutions to problems.
Yeah. There's not a whole lot. I did read a recent article though by the New York Times. We'll link that into the description of this podcast episode. But it was interesting because he was
This was the David Brooks article.
I
think it was David
believe
Brooks.
so. Yeah, I think so. Social justice and Christianity. But he opens up the article by saying that there's these justice issues, and he was trying to conceive of like how we should address these, and he ends up interviewing an individual from Wheaton College. Again, the name escapes my mind, but we'll link the article
I
in.
think it was Esau McCauley, but I'm not sure. I think it was Esau.
Yeah.
The Anglican.
Okay. And it was just interesting that as he began unfolding this view of basically fundamental human dignity or human value and created in the image of God, he puts this note on the theory saying it's a uniquely Christian view and one that is applicable both to believer and non-believer. Now, I know there's a ton of debate on whether or not you can have fundamental human value that's not anchored in the Imago Dei or eventually God. But I do think that it's hopeful in this sense that people are starting to see that CRT isn't the only way in which we can view social justice issues and try to solve it. That there are better theories out there that can address not just the issues that CRT has identified, but all the other issues that we also believe are problematic and more transcendent. I mean, this is why, if you adopt the whole narrative-driven problem, then the problems really depend upon the narrative or the news cycle or whoever's controlling the story.
Mm-hmm.
But if the church could reaffirm the doctrine of the image of God, fundamental human value, it can begin locating problems within society that are transcendent and not controlled by the narrative. They could focus on poverty, whether or not it's narrative driven. They can focus on racial reconciliation, whether or not it's racial driven. You don't have to wait for CRT to highlight white on Asian crime, but also you can deal with black on Asian crime, which CRT will never highlight as part of its theory sensitivity. I mean, maybe in another podcast we can go into what is theory sensitivity, but I mean, look up, I guess, like axiomatic geometry or something that might help. Some books on that, like Gödel, Escher, and Bach by Hofstadter could be a good introduction on what theory sensitivity is and stuff like that. But
well, in short, it's just how sensitive is the theory to certain empirical facts and data, and
yeah, but like, I mean, for example, like the retrogradation problem of Mars isn't a problem for biology. So there's a theory sensitivity in physics that doesn't translate to biology. Mm-hmm. Same thing with CRT with the Imago Dei. There are certain things that the CRT is not picking up.
Right.
That's important, but there are things that the Imago Dei view picks up and also addresses, I think, more fundamentally, more transcendently the CRT problems.
I mean, I guarantee you that our CRT brothers and sisters in Christ or advocates of CRT, they're not denying the Imago Dei though. The
No.
doctrine of the Imago Dei.
But the thing is that as a Christian, in any discussion that we have in engaging with someone who looks different from me or is a stranger to me, this discussion of Imago Dei, the image of God, is vital. I think we can't, as Christians, keep that aside when it comes to engaging, because that's the only thing that's going to unite us together and bring us together. There is much about us, even four of us here, there's much about us that is different. There is much that can actually separate us from each other. There's only one thing that can bring us together is the fact that we all are made in the image of God. Right. And that's an important discussion to have. And I've not so far heard any of the advocates of CRT touching on that aspect, even Christians, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, I think they're not. Okay.
So what I want to know is actually, it's not that they may not be denying the fact that we all have the image of God. Even within that image of God, I think there is this graded hierarchy that CRT allows for, which I don't think has any mandate in the Bible.
Yeah, well, that's what I wanted to pick up. Exactly, so I wanted Jacob to finish. Exactly. I don't think that they're denying the Imago Dei metaphysically, and I don't know if they would even deny it doctrinally, but I do think in practice they're denying it in the social realm. Mm-hmm. It has no. It's just like a metaphysical appendage to their social theory. It has no work in the way it views society. But if you accept it anthropologically,
it's like how many angels can dance on the head of a pin.
So if we see
it's just out there.
I think how this idea of human dignity kind of like in the social sphere, how it developed, it never gave equal dignity to all individuals as the scriptures does. For example, there was this logocentric view of human dignity. If you actually had reason, then only you had dignity. Polycentric dignity, right? If you belong to a certain locality, then you had dignity. Or cosmocentric, if you belong to the cosmos, you have certain dignities. Even that is graded. It's only when the scriptures were brought that we had kind of Christocentric, word-based, right? On the fact that we all are made in the image of God. And Christ restores that image on us, that we can claim for dignity on all individuals. That's a unique gift of Christianity. And with CRT and other similar kind of ideologies, what we are doing is we are going to that primitive view of dignity assigned only to few, and it's kind of graded. And I don't think it will be a regress rather than a progress in terms of human flourishing.
And that's the problem, Jacob, is even Christian proponents of CRT, who I think fully well, if you ask them, would say, yeah, of course I believe in the Imago Dei. But the Imago Dei for them isn't primary. CRT actually is more primary than the Imago Dei in terms of its functional power in the Christian life, in terms of the social view of people. So the question isn't simply what do you believe in, but how does that do you really think that our the way we're designed, the fact that the image of God is in us, do you think that's actually what makes us equal? If that's not the grounding for equality, then it's always going to be uneven. I mean, what else could create true equality other than that?
And that's the article that we referred to about the Asian community in New York. I mean, if you can get past just sort of like the occasional content, the fundamental content is, as an Asian community, the more successful we become, the less relevant we become. But that's part and parcel of the CRT worldview when you divide everything up into oppressed, oppressor, and oppressed. But the oppressors are the successful, however you want to define it, or have power in society or take on whatever positions. The Asian community is saying the more positions we take up, the less we're being valued. Well, that seems part and parcel of the CRT theory, which is dangerous, I think.
Yeah, and I want to add this to our listeners. With CRT, you may be able to engage with, or at least in terms of dialogue, or you want to give a framework to engage with the issue of racism between different races. With essential equal dignity, it will also allow you to actually deal with injustice within your own race. which CRT fails to do in many sense.
Mhm.
CRT doesn't offer a framework to actually engage with black on black, Asian on Asian, white on white.
Right.
What framework are you appealing to? And I think what Christian faith offers on the basis of this, that we all are created equal, not just engaging with racism between two different races, but also within our own race. And that's a holistic framework we should not afford to abandon at all.
Yeah, that's good. That's right. Well, this has been good. And I will say, I'll give a shout out to, I think someone we all know who has written extensively on the Imago Dei, Ryan Peterson. Let's get Ryan's name out there as a top-notch theologian who's done a lot of work on the issue of Imago Dei. So please look him up. Maybe we'll link to a couple of his things for the sake of our audience. Okay, well, gentlemen, this has been excellent, and I look forward to seeing you the next time. And where I think we will continue a little bit more with CRT before we move on to some other issues. This has been the Equal Justice Podcast. See you later.